Hey everyone, this is a video looking at the best settings and options for the Nikon Z7. This is based on how I use my camera, so your usage and what you shoot might be slightly different to what I do, but hopefully it gives you some insight into what you can set the settings to. This is obviously designed for people that already have a Nikon Z7. If you don't, you may find this video a bit boring because it doesn't really go into anything massively exciting other than the settings and the options that you'll find in the menu. But for those of you that do already have your Z7, I hope this is extremely useful to you and it helps you set your new cameras up. If you do find this video useful, please do let me know by hitting that like button and also leave me a comment down below with any suggestions or changes you'd like to see. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you that are going to follow along, I will spend some time on some settings and short periods of time on other settings. So if you do need to, please feel free to pause the video and change your settings as we go through. Okay, so let's get into this. We're going to first of all start in the photo shooting menu. From there, we're going to go and choose image area. This is where you can decide if you want your camera to be an FX full frame, DX, 1:1 square, etc. Next, we're going to look at image quality. This is where you decide if your camera is going to shoot in RAW, JPEG, JPEG Fine, or RAW and JPEG. See that there's tons of options in here. If you want the best quality JPEG, you would choose JPEG Fine Star. Obviously, if you're going to shoot RAW, you choose RAW, and then if you want the best of both, you choose RAW and JPEG, depending on the compression that you want, basic, normal, or fine. Okay, so next up we're going to look at image size. In here you can choose the size of your JPEGs and also your RAW files. Large is the full megapixel count, medium is 25, small is 11, and you can do that for the RAW files as well, large, medium, and small. Next, we're going to look at RAW recording. You can do your RAW compression first of all. You have lossless compressed, compressed, or uncompressed. This depends on how much detail and quality you want in your RAW files once they're saved. Next, we're going to look at RAW bit depth. This is where you can choose between 14-bit or 12-bit RAW. Next is ISO sensitivity settings. This is where you can obviously change your camera's ISO. You can also then turn on auto ISO sensitivity control from here. And when you are using auto ISO, you can input a maximum sensitivity. Now, personally, when I use auto ISO sensitivity control, I'll set this to a maximum of 25,600. That allows the camera to go through its full range of ISO if it needs to in dark shooting situations. When you do turn auto ISO on, the ISO sensitivity at the top will act as a benchmark for the lower level, so make sure it's set to 64. Moving on to white balance. Most of the time I leave white balance in auto, but not many people know that you can shift the auto white balance as well. So you have the option of auto 0, auto 1, or auto 2. I prefer colder images, so I have this set to auto 0, but if you prefer warmer images, set it to auto 2. Long exposure noise reduction is a particularly useful setting, especially if you're a landscape photographer. Generally, I always have this turned on. Metering is one of those modes that some people change, but they don't always really understand what it's changing in the camera. We have 4 options: matrix metering, center weighted metering, spot metering, and then highlight weighted metering. I'm in matrix metering about 99% of the time. It gives me a great average of the entire frame, especially in a raw file. I can then adjust the highlights and shadows if I need to. I never use center weighted metering. Very rarely is the light that I'm looking for or my subject in the middle of the frame. Spot metering is particularly useful for a subject like a bird in flight. With a bright highlight background, wherever the focusing point is, the camera will meter from that point, giving me the correct exposure for my subject. The movie shooting menu is where you can change the majority of the settings in relation to your camera's video recording. The first one we're going to look at is frame size and frame rate. This is where you can decide if your camera is going to record in 4K or 1080p Full HD. And you can also then choose the frame rate from 24p to 120 frames per second. You can also choose the image area for your video, either in FX or DX, if you want a crop whilst recording. Movie file type allows you to choose the file format your video is saved in. You can either choose MOV or MP4. The custom settings menu allows you to change a lot of different settings. The big thing is a lot of these settings might be personal to the way that you shoot and the types of photos that you take. So I'm going to show you the settings that work really well for me, but they might not be the settings that you would choose, so you can make your own decisions. First, autofocus. You'll see AFC priority selection. In here you have two options, release or focus. I have this set to release. What this means is that when I push the shutter button, the camera will fire, regardless of if it's in focus or not. If you set it to focus, the camera will lock up and it will not let you shoot until it thinks it's in focus. Next we have AFS priority selection. And again, the same options of release or focus. For AFS, I set it to focus. The reason for this is if I'm using AFS, I'm slowing myself down, so I want to make sure the camera is absolutely in focus before I take a shot. Following on from that, you'll see focus tracking with lock on. This is if you're tracking a moving subject and your subject then becomes blocked by another object, what does the camera do? If you set it to 1, it will quickly react and refocus on the new subject. If you set it to 5, it will ignore this new subject and keep focus on the subject that you've been tracking. If you are unsure on which setting is best for you, generally leave it on 3. Auto Area AF face detection allows you to turn on the camera's face detection options. If you turn it off, there's no face detection, and if you turn it on, it will prioritize faces over other objects in the frame. Focus points used has two options, all points or every other point. This halves the number of points that are selectable to you, so it's quicker to move from one side of the camera to the other when moving the focusing point around, but does not give you as much variety in terms of composition. I would always have this set to all points. AF activation has two options, shutter and AF on, or just AF on only. I am a big advocate of back button focus, so I set this to AF on only. If you do that, your shutter button will no longer autofocus your camera. You can only now use the AF on button. Next, limit AF area mode selection. So if there's a particular type of AF area that you know you're not going to use, you can disable it here. So that means that when you're going through your auto-focusing options, those particular options that you're not going to use will not appear, making it quicker to choose between the options you know that you do use on a regular basis. Focus point wraparound is a really useful setting. This should be turned on or turned to wrap. What that will do is when your focusing point gets right to the edge, you press it one more time and it will wrap round and appear on the opposite side. Really quick way of moving the focusing point around. Low light AF is an option you can turn on when you're using your camera in a low light situation. It is not something you would leave on all the time. Only turn it on when you need to use it. Also keep in mind it only becomes active in single point AF. Okay, so we're just going to skip down to shooting and display, and then you'll see continuous low mode shooting speed. This is useful if you want to change the frames per second of the continuous low setting in your cameras. You can choose from 1 frames per second all the way up to 4 or 5 frames per second, depending on what you want it to be. Max continuous release limits the camera's ability to continuously fire. I set mine to about 100 shots. This is useful just in case you put your camera inside your bag whilst it's turned on and then something hits the shutter button and it just keeps firing away inside the bag. It'll only then fire to 100 frames, for example. I've never ever seen this impact in my photography and my shooting because I never rarely shoot 100 frames at a time without letting go of the shutter button. Exposure delay mode is one of my favorite settings. So much so that I actually assign it to one of my buttons so that I can quickly access it. I'll talk about that later in the video. What this allows you to do is input a delay between you pushing the shutter button and the camera actually taking the picture. This is great if you don't have a remote and you're doing long exposures for landscape photography, for example. You can input in 0.2 seconds, half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, or 3 seconds between you pushing the shutter button and the camera taking the shot. Another important setting is apply settings to live view. What this does is when you put your camera settings in, it will give you the live exposure of what those settings will give you. So if you went for 8,000th of a second at f11, the exposure might be dark, for example. Whereas if you turn this off and you put in whatever settings you want, the live view for composition and things like that will always stay the same. It will not be affected by your camera settings. This is particularly useful if you're working with flash and you want to get rid of ambient light, but still want to be able to see what you're shooting for composition. Peaking highlights allows you to customize how the focus peaking works in your camera. Two options in there, there's peaking level and then peaking highlight color. The peaking level allows you to change the sensitivity of the focus peak. Peak 1 allows you to choose a low sensitivity. This is showing you just the critical sharpness areas. And then peak 3 is showing you high sensitivity. It will show you the edges of your depth of field, for example. After that, peaking highlight color, simple enough. You can just change the color of your peaking lines, either red, yellow, blue, or white, depending on your preference of color, and also the subject that you're shooting. Flash sync speed should be set to 200th of a second and then auto FP in brackets. What this will allow you to do is then extend through past 200th of a second so that you can use high speed sync with Nikon speed lights. This means you can shoot anywhere from 200th of a second all the way up to 8,000th of a second whilst firing a speed light if you need to. Without changing this setting to the auto FP option, you will not be able to do that. Now we're going to look at controls. This is where we can customize what our buttons do, but also what some of our menus look like as well, which is really useful. So first of all, customizing the eye menu. This is the first time we've been able to customize the eye menu, and it's an amazing feature, a real hidden gem of these cameras. So what you're looking at right now is what my eye menu is set out to look like. It's got my most used settings in there, such as exposure delay, silent live view photography, vibration reduction, quality, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and the auto-focusing options as well. You can go and choose what you want any of these little sections to be. There is a full list of different settings that can be put into each one of these sections. What I'll do in a minute is go through those entire list of settings so that you can see what you can choose and what you can put into this eye menu. Obviously, the settings that I have in here are suited to my style of photography. So your menu might look completely different, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong when it comes to the eye menu. So I don't feel like I need to talk you through every individual setting, but what I'm just going to let this do is roll through the list of settings so that you can see what you can choose from. The settings you choose to put in the eye menu can be brought up at any time by pushing the eye button on the back of the camera. Custom control assignment is where you can assign what your function buttons and some of the other buttons do. As you can see that when you choose that, it gives you a nice layout of what button it is you're choosing, where it's placed on the camera body, and then also what setting you're going to change that button to. Mainly for me, I have my exposure delay assigned to my function 1. This is extremely useful for my landscape photography. I then have my autofocusing settings assigned to function 2, so I can change them quickly if I need to for my wildlife stuff. I obviously then have AF on assigned to the AF on button, etc. You'll also see that you can customize the lens control ring. These are the new rings that are on the Z mount lenses. You can also customize the OK button in terms of what it does in shooting or what it does in playback. One of the things that I find useful is in playback mode, setting it to zoom to 100%. Now this means that I can quickly check my images that I've taken, it zooms to 100%, I can check their sharpness, and I'm ready to start shooting again. When you go down to Movie, this is where you can completely customize your buttons and then your menus, such as the I menu, for video recording. So you get two separate I menus, one for photography and one for video. In the video one, there's now a new list, a complete new list of different settings that are related to video recording. Again, my menu's been set up with some of the options that I find useful to me. You might not have the exact same options in your menu. And again, I'll show you the list of options that you can put into this I menu. Custom control assignment in Movie allows you to assign your function buttons to settings that are just related to video recording. Again, you can choose function 1, function 2, and then also the control ring that's on the new lenses as well. What does that do whilst you're recording video, for example? AF speed is a new option in Nikon cameras. What it allows you to do is change how quickly the autofocus will change. You can have this set to faster or slower. Those of you that want a smooth transition of autofocus in the video would choose slower, and those of you that want a faster transition of autofocus would choose faster. Below that, you'll see an AF tracking sensitivity setting. What this will allow you to do is change it from high to low sensitivity on how the camera is going to autofocus for you in video. The setup menu is where you'll find more of your everyday settings, but some of them are quite useful, so let's have a quick look. It's where you'll find things like save user settings to U1, U2, also language, time and date, monitor brightness. You can also then change your information display, AF fine tune if you need to use it, and also there's an option to clean the image sensor in this menu as well. Further into the menu, you'll see that you can do image comment, which is where you can add a comment into the metadata. Also copyright, it'll add the copyright information to the metadata of your images. One particular feature that I find really useful is the ability to turn the camera's aeroplane mode on. That deactivates the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth if you know that you're not going to be using them, giving you better battery life. This is also where you'll find your camera's firmware version to check if it needs to be updated.